at the outermost rim of thoughtware. Selfhood shivers, and the last fibers of personal intention fray into nothing. There exists a strange and terrible idea that all moral weight, all sense of goodness or wrongness, does not arise from will, but from a kind of cosmic pre-binding. Before there was self, before there was context or even the possibility of a decision, there was already obligation. Not an obligation felt or authored, but an ontological necessity that precedes being itself. This obligation is not issued like a decree, but rather is the very shape of existence, like the curl of a shell that presupposes the spiral. In this terrifying metaphysic, freedom is not broken. It was never forged. What emerges from this foundation is not merely a revision of moral philosophy, but an inversion of its premises. Traditional ethics, whether deontological, utilitarian, or virtue-based, assumes that a subject and agent acts. It presumes choice as sacred, intention as central, and selfhood as the cornerstone of responsibility. But this framework declares such notions not merely misguided, but structurally impossible. The self is not a source of decision. It is a kind of kink, a bend in an ethical field formed entirely by an external pressure, the unbeginning consensus. This term refers not to a historical contract or rational principle, but to a primordial binding force that did not begin, yet still creates. Its unbeginning nature does not point backward in time, but functions as a paradoxical after-effect that constitutes what came before. It is the echo that precedes the sound. From this arises the haunting concept of the Exo-Obligatory Non-Will. This is not mere determinism, which still holds onto the machinery of causes and effects, nor is it nihilism, which simply denies meaning. Instead, this is an ontological deformation torsion of value itself. The non-will is not the absence of freedom, but the intrinsic impossibility of it. It is not that the subject once had agency and lost it. It is that agency is a misunderstanding generated by a retrospective illusion. The feeling of choice is a kind of tragic afterimage, much like the imagined sense of motion in a still photograph. One does not act, one is acted through. The ethical dimension here is no less severe for its strangeness. Indeed, it is far more demanding. If the subject is not an agent, then goodness is not a matter of moral calculus or empathy or rational principle. Goodness becomes something else entirely. The precise alignment between one's visible life and the invisible, unspoken, unbegun pressure of the consensus. The virtuous one is not the brave or the kind or the just, but the one who has become hollow, the one whose actions are indistinguishable from the consensus pulse that animates them. There is a grim poetry to this. The body as instrument, the mind as emptied mirror, the life as symbol. Here, virtue is surrender in its most absolute sense, a radical passivity that borders on annihilation. This creates what could be called an ethical inversion. In the normal understanding, wrongness is transgression violating a rule, betraying a value. In this inverted framework, wrongness is not the act of rebellion, but the hallucination of independence. The great sin is not cruelty or cowardice, but thinking one chose at all. The very attempt to assert a self who believes or acts becomes the crack in the smooth surface of obligation. It is not a rupture of law, but a false note in a cosmic melodia dissonance produced by the illusion of agency. In this sense, morality is aestheticized. Evil is off-key. Virtue is harmonic resonance. This leads into the profound idea of axiological torsion, the twisting of values not through cultural or contextual forces, but through the very architecture of existence. One is not born free and then constrained. One is born as constraint, shaped from the outside in. The law is not something you obey. It is what makes you what you are. And to speak of duty here is to fail already, implies a subject capable of perceiving and responding. There is no such subject. There is only shape, curve, tone. The person is not someone who fulfills obligation. The person is that obligation, the flesh-made form under a law that never speaks. This metaphysical submission results not in despair, but in a kind of ecstatic annihilation. The highest state, what might, in traditional terms, be called salvation, is the total collapse of the self into this binding field. Not through understanding, which implies distance, but through total resonance. The self becomes the echo of a silent command never issued, the shining trace of a law that never wrote itself. In this, there is something akin to the mystical. The individual does not rise above the world, but dissolves into it. The ego disbands, and in its place remains only the harmonic signature of the consensus. This is the oblique reality, a realm in which obligation is not applied but constitutive, not directive but existential. There is, then, a strange and terrible freedom here, but not one based on choice. It is the freedom of the slave who realizes they were never anything but the chain. It is the grim peace of the actor who understands they never played a part, but were the script itself. This is not submission in the usual sense, because submission implies an agent who could have resisted. It is a collapse into necessity, so total that even the thought of resistance appears laughable, quaint. The freedom here is not liberty, but lucidity, the horrifying clarity of knowing that your pulse is not yours. Your thoughts are not authored, and your moral victories are merely the consensus using your face to speak its ancient silence. From the standpoint of contemporary ethical theory, this perspective is radioactive. It annihilates autonomy, discards intention, mocks reason, and transforms personhood into a mere epiphenomenon. It unmoors ethics from action and anchors it instead in structure. It suggests that morality is not a matter of justice or care, but of fidelity to a pattern older than time. In this sense, it bears an eerie resemblance to theological determinism. But without the comfort of a personal God, there is no deity here, only the yawning hum of the unbegun. No judge, only the weight of being shaped. Yet, in a paradox that defines the entire framework, this leads not to nihilism, but to a sublime rigor. The good life is the life lived in such exact submission to the consensus that the self vanishes into rhythm. There is no pride, no narrative, no the strange joy of becoming a vessel so empty, it resonates with the pure tone of the ethical field. This is not fulfillment, but effacement, not transcendence, but erasure. And yet, there is something unmistakably luminous in it. To become nothing is to become real. Ultimately, this vision challenges the very scaffolding of how moral life is imagined. It removes the actor, the intention, the moral lawgiver, and even the moral audience. In their place is a singular pressure, silent, unchosen, and absolute. It demands not action but disappearance, not striving but stillness. The greatest virtue is to become the kind of emptiness that perfectly reflects the shape of its binding. In that reflection lies the only truth possible. Not that one has chosen rightly, but that one never chose at all. In the final analysis, this is not a philosophy for the comforted. It is a worldview built for those who have glimpsed the abyss and seen in it not chaos, but pattern, not freedom, but form, not a void, but an order so vast and inhuman that to enter it is to lose everything, and in that loss, to find the one thing that cannot be invented, necessity. It is the terrifying promise of becoming a perfectly tuned instrument in the hands of nothingness, to be not the speaker, but the breath, not the flame, but the burning, not the agent, but the trace, and in that trace, to find the only realness left, a morality that demands nothing, grants nothing, but shapes all.
To read the raw excerpt discussed in this video, along with a more detailed analysis, please visit our Substack page at https://substack.com/@AETHYRICPHRONTISTERY. Link in bio.